Hey, I'm Anthony, and this is going to be something a little new. And it's going to be kind of long. I added in some bookmarks to skip ahead to anything that interests you if you want to go directly to that. I'd love to continue this format if you let me know if it was helpful, if there's something you'd like to see in the future. I've been developing add-ons for Blender for a couple of years now, and usually I would just finish a project, demo the features, and upload the video to promote the product. Recently, I'm realizing how much I learned in the process and that it's worth sharing that at least as much as it's worth sharing the add-on itself. So this is the start of a lessons learned video series. We will review the goals of the project, break it down into its components, and show the code and the results. My actual projects seem to run outside the boundaries of most tutorial videos, so I hope that it has some unique content that you will find helpful. And I'm still learning a lot on all of this. Every time I do something, I learn more about Blender, I learn more about Python programming, and how all these quirky things work together. If you have a better way to do it than anything that I'm showing, I'm thrilled to hear from you. I'm not going to be defensive. Everybody has their preferences on how to develop things, and everybody has different experiences. And lastly, I want you, before we get into the real content, I want you to know about a Discord server called BPY. I can't overstate how much of a difference it makes that I have that Discord server as a resource. A whole bunch of Blender add-on developers are there. The most helpful group of developers I've worked with, paid or unpaid. So if you have any interest in Blender add-on development, I encourage you to look at the link below and join up. Okay, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We are trying to make an add-on for 2D animation keyframes. Before this project, I didn't know what this would mean, what the difference between 2D and 3D workflows would be, but apparently 2D animation can use, obviously, grease pencil, which has been a focus for Blender, but it could also use curves heavily. So the support for curves in animation is a little lacking. And this add-on is trying to fill in some of those gaps. So there's some existing add-ons already. KeyMesh is a add-on that will allow you to swap out data blocks, but it doesn't work for curves. And we'll talk about what all that means later. Then there's an included with Blender add-on called AnimAll, which will allow you to tween all of the points in a curve in your keyframes, but it doesn't allow auto key. So I need to merge those two together, including those improvements, KeyMesh working with curves and AnimAll working with auto key. And then additionally, we're trying to reproduce some grease pencil-like functionality. Here we have the KeyMesh add-on, pretty small. It's kind of hard to get a smaller code base than 250 lines in an add-on. Almost all of it is just a thing to swap out data blocks and then a handler in order to swap them back in on frame change. You can see at the very top of the issues doesn't work with curves, and that's one of the things we're looking to do. And like a lot of add-ons, hey, this accomplished what he was looking to do, and it worked for him, and doesn't really have any interest in updating it since then. Here we have the source code for the AnimAll add-on that's included with Blender, and this is where I learned that you can keyframe anything, any data that you can point to just about. The only catch that is that it has to be a number or a float. But this thing is super simple. It just breaks down everything into smaller components so they can be keyframed. And most of this code is just based on what kind of object you're keyframing, whether it's a mesh, a curve, or whatever. Besides that, it's super simple, but doesn't do the auto key. I'm working with curves primarily, so here's a circle. I'm going to bring the timeline up a little bit so we can see it in my little add-on panel, which for the most part is prototypey, just to work things out. Most things are supposed to be like in a smart mode where everything works together, but I have to kind of make the modes separately before I can make them work together. So here is an example of where I'm going to insert a keyframe, and this is going to take this data block and it's going to make a copy of it. So if I go over here to the scripting interface, we can find it under objects. So even though I only have one object in the scene, I have a disconnected object that contains that data block, and I'm going to do this for every keyframe. So I go to another frame. I'm going to add a Bezier curve, and I'm going to insert another key. Let's come out to object mode, and you can see that it's going to switch. So it's using the same object, but it is using different data blocks, and it's swapping them in and out based on what frame it is. So the way I was able to accomplish that was I have an object ID here that is keyframed, and the keyframe has to be on something that's a number, but I never would have thought that you could keyframe a custom property, but like I said earlier, you can keyframe anything. That's something I learned from the key mesh add-on. And it uses this object ID in the animation in the animation data in order to know what data block to go get, or what the previous one is, the previous key was, etc. So this is really the key to switching those data blocks out. Now, in order to get the tween data in there, the tween keys are a little less complex. We should be able to come in here, move any number of points, do another tween key, and then see the difference in those. That's actually, that's pretty standard. It's not a big deal. The tough part is making sure that that data isn't lost when I switch objects, right? Because the animation data for those points is stored in the data block. It's not stored at the object. The animation data for this, for the custom property is stored at the object level. So understanding what's in the object and what's in the data block is pretty significant for this project. And so I had to make sure that all of the animation data was being copied back and forth with the data blocks, so that it wasn't lost when you swapped the objects in and out. All right, now let's show this grease pencil-like functionality. In Grease Pencil, you're able to just go into like a draw mode and start drawing, and then every frame that you start drawing, it clears the previous frame as soon as you start drawing, or as soon as you finish drawing your first action. So here, we're just going to leave this as a standard Bezier, no big deal. Go a few frames, and I'm going to add actually, let's go to just the next frame, and we'll add a circle. When I insert this next frame, it should, I want to do that previous one. Okay, let's see if we can show the grease pencil type functionality. So I've already got this curve here. I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to go ahead and set the first frame. Go to frame 2. I'm going to add another element here, and then when I set it, it removes the previous stuff. I'm going to go to the next one. I can explain what's going on here in a second. I'm going to go to the next one. I'm going to add a Bezier back, insert another key, right? And I can just keep doing this kind of stuff circle. Let's go ahead and have a point on it. Right? And now when I go back, you can see that they have done the key mesh type thing with each of the frames. And the key thing there is that it's able to understand which shapes were in the previous frame and remove them. Now let's talk about the grease pencil type functionality. This is my most recent stuff. I still have some things to work out. We can at least demo what the idea is. I've got a curve here. I'm going to go into edit mode and set my first key. Now what this is supposed to do is whenever I draw a new object and I set that key, it's going to remove what was previously there. I'll go to another frame, we'll set Bezier, and we'll do that again. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the grease pinch functionality now. All right, so the latest thing I'm working on is a grease pencil functionality. I've already got a curve here, and what I want it to do is every time I go to a new frame and I draw something, it needs to recognize what was previously there and remove it, as long as it hasn't changed. Right? So I have a geometry compare function, and it looks at the data block and it applies that. Now this is going to start getting a little weird. These are things to work out. It gets a little confused as to the keys that are there versus the data that it's now seeing, and you know, it doesn't know what to do with it. So that's something for me to figure out. And then there's another interesting thing here where despite all of that working, sometimes it will not want to, there's some geometry that will persist. Even though the whole key mesh functionality works out fine, once you start combining all these things together, it gets a little more tangled. And you can see what it's trying to do there. Now to make this a little crazier, there's the auto key, which we're trying to now we're trying to make everything work in auto key, and this gets a little more interesting because now you have to understand when somebody is done drawing. I'm going to go to another frame, and now I do the circle. Oh, I didn't have it on. Let's go ahead and do that. And yeah, there we go. So every frame I go to, I can do this, and it should know what the last thing was and do that automatically. It's the same function as when I was pressing the button, but now it has to intelligently know when to press that button for you. And there's a lot of complication that came out of doing this, and we're going to go over the techniques to handle that kind of stuff. Now for some lessons learned. I've been using object.data for years without understanding that data is literally the data block. And the data block is what is in a mesh or a curve or any of those objects. So there's the actual object, and then there's the data block that an object can contain. And that data block can exist outside of an object and everything, but for the purpose of this understanding, knowing that everything that represents something, all the geometry and stuff in a mesh or in a curve is held in that data block. Custom properties are literally custom properties inside of Blender. It's as easy as putting a dictionary key on your object and then assigning it a value. And you can do this with anything. I put serialized JSON in it, I put strings in it. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. And here you can see a few examples. I'm sure this comes in really small on a video. But I've got, let's see if I can make this any bigger. I've got a ID, which is a number. I've got a string, which is a name of an object, and I've got another number, and the reason it's lit up yellow is because it's keyframed. So custom properties are these custom properties in Blender that you can assign to objects. And the neat thing about custom properties is you can assign them in your add-on, but then you can also use them in things like geometry nodes or shaders. And if you ever want, you can do all kinds of, you can stuff all kinds of things inside of custom properties, even blobs of some sorts. But if you want to be able to keyframe it, it needs to be a number. All right, so now let's talk about animation data. Animation data is where your keyframes are stored. So anytime you have these keyframes, what represents it is called F-curves and animation data. And these are the reason that we have to have the numbers, because everything's represented in an XY format. And you can see here the difference between ones that are tweened. You know, they have the line, and ones that are not. And you know, the X is going to represent the frame, and the Y is going to represent the value. And everything I've seen so far works that way. Now, the key thing to understand here is that the animation data for things like those points, those are stored under the data block. And then the animation data for the custom properties, that's stored at the object level. So when you come in here and you're working with animation data, let me go ahead and find one of the F-curves thing. All right, so here I'm working with F-curves under animation data, and all of this is at the object level. Right, this is not at the data level. So this is great for object level things, your scale, transform, rotation, custom properties. All of those things can be done with keyframes, and you will find it at the object level. But then anything that you do that is you know, about the data block animating is going to be in the data block. So it'll be under, instead of object animation data, it will be data.animation data. I think I have an example. Right, so here's one where I go to see if we've got any tween keys that exist. It's under the data.animation data. So key difference to understand there. If anybody wants some examples in text of how to work with these keyframes and F-curves, you know, just come to the Discord and let me know. Now I have a geometry comparison, and this one was a little weird. You know, I go through each of the splines. I compare them to the previous ones by passing in an old object and a new object, and for each of them I look at their locations to see if they match, and if they do, then I can delete them all at the end. I'm deleting them all at the end because I don't want the index of the splines to change after I've deleted one, and then I go to get the next one. Maybe that would work out fine, but I felt it was easier to add them all to a list and delete them all at the end. So one thing of note here, this is usually not a good way to do it. If you are trying to look if something's in the same location, just .co will often not give that to you, because they will be always at a different location. If they were two points at exactly the same location in different data blocks, then the precision would be way off. You would end up with, we'll say a y value of 1.000345, whatever, and another one will have a y value of 1.000 322 or whatever. And I think it gets a little further down after the decimal point like that. And as far as you're concerned, these are the same location, but in an equals equals operator, it's not going to see it that way. So you usually have to do something that will compare it to a precision level. And so you'll have to define what precision matters to you, and say, okay, well, if it's within these ranges, then it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's already, it's the same location. The reason I'm able to get away with this being equals equals is because I copied the entire data block. So it's literally the exact position with all of its imprecision. So, I compare everything, I delete stuff, and one of the things I had to add in here was just an extra check to never delete the last spline, because there are some cases where you'll double key something. It'll find the old object is basically the same as the new object, then you lose, you end up with a blank frame. So I never want a blank frame, so I'm just saying, hey, never remove the last one. And that seemed to help out for the use case I'm doing. Lastly, I've got this auto key functionality and how I was able to accomplish it. So I've set this up so that in edit mode with auto key on, it's supposed to recognize when you're done changing something and set the key. And you can see it, set the key there. So this took some doing in order to pull off. I'm going to show you what we've got going there. It starts with having a handler. So if you don't know what handlers are, it's good to look them up. There's only a few events that you can actually trigger off of. And where's my handlers? I define them in the register, right? And I've got a couple handlers. I've got a on-frame handler, and this is for swapping those data blocks in and out. And then I've got an on auto key handler. And we're going to go look at that one. So in the on auto key handler, I'm looking at the DepsGraph updates, and this thing triggers like crazy. So if I were to be in Blender and I just move something from basically every time the pixels move, it would fire. So that would have been dozens of calls, but I don't want that to happen dozens of times. And you can see I wait until I'm done and then it keys it. And that's the effect that I wanted. So first thing I needed to do, because this calls so often, is I needed to set some parameters for actually dealing with this. Is auto key on? Are they in edit mode? And then there's this flag it has for is updated geometry, which seems to trigger probably way too much. But that's okay, because then I come over here and I do this debounce action. And what this does is it has a timer that is set here. And it says that only if this much time has passed since the previous one am I going to consider this like the final action. Like, wait for a pause in some of these crazy actions before I actually take action on whatever that last thing was. And so by doing this, I set it to 1/3 of a second. I'll go ahead and update my note on it. It doesn't fire on all of those dozens of times when, for every pixel. It just waits till you pause, and then it fires, and then it ends up running the same exact function that I was running by pressing the button. And that ended up doing it for me. Right, so with with these handlers, you got to set that handler. You have to filter it as much as you can. Debounce it if you can. And then it's also important to remember that the context can change quite a bit. So even though I'm running the same exact thing from a button versus the handler, the context that you get from the handler or the context that you're in is different than when you're in the UI and pressing the pressing this button. So even though they point to the same thing, there's quite a few things that are different when it comes to what's selected, what's active. All those context type things are different on the handler. So something to be aware of. So that's all I had for now. Let me know what you think. If you want it slowed down, how the pacing was. If there's anything that you want to have in a text format, happy to make a gist. The best place to ask for it is on the BPY Discord server that I mentioned. And the last thing I want to say is if you're getting into Blender development and you find an add-on that does something that you like, I encourage you to buy that add-on. Even if you are just using it for reference, average Blender add-on costs something like $20, and most developers are worth a lot more than $20 an hour. So it's seems logical to me that it's worth just buying someone's add-on as a reference. And I think most developers are cool with that. As long as you're not just rebranding it and putting it out there afterwards. So again, let me know what you think, and I hope this helps somebody learn something.